Hi, welcome to a two-part voiceover PowerPoint series on the forgiveness paradox. We're going to take a look at forgiveness from a positive psychology standpoint. Here's your song for the day and thoughts.
You say that you're born again, cleansed of your former sins. You want me to say I'll forgive and forget, but you've done too much to me. Don't you be touching me. Go back and touch all those women you met. Go back and touch all those. God may forgive you, but I won't. God may. Yes, Jesus loves you, but I don't. Yes, Jesus don't have to live with you. Well, neither do I. Don't have. You say that you're born again. Well, so am I. Say that God may forgive you, but I won't. And I won't even try. Forgive you, but I won't. And I won't even try. Well, the kids had to cry for you. I had to try to do things that the dad should do since you've been gone. Well, you really let us down. You may be heaven bound, you left one hell of a mess here at home. You left one hell of a mess. God may forgive you, but I won't. God may forgive. Yes, Jesus loves you, but I don't. Yes, Jesus don't have to live with you, and neither do I. Don't have. You say that you're born again. Well, so am I. Say that God may forgive you, but I won't. And I won't even try. Forgive you, but I won't. And I won't even try. And I won't even try.
So, how do you look at forgiveness? Eye for an eye? To err is human, forgive is divine. Do you forgive and forget? Or you don't get even, you get ahead. You seek revenge and payback is a bitch. Which one of those is most like you? So I'm going to give you some situations. I'm going to ask you if you can forgive them. It's just you, so you can be honest, yes or no. And there's no judgment. Just want you to get an idea of forgiveness. So you have a spouse that's cheating on you. Can you forgive him or her? What about if they're cheating with your best friend? How about somebody like Michael Vick? Now, for those of you who don't remember who Michael Vick was, he was an All-American quarterback at Virginia Tech. First-round draft pick for the Atlanta Falcons, was doing great. But he also, in the off-season, was involved with dog fighting and ended up killing dogs and so forth. He was convicted of cruel and inhumane dog fighting, was sentenced to 23 months in prison, which he served every bit of it. And then he came back and eventually played football. But some people could never, ever get over the fact that he killed dogs. What about you? What about the shooter at Virginia Tech? That massacre. Can you forgive him? How about the people that crashed into the Twin Towers at 9/11? Or more recently here in Las Vegas, the shooter that killed over 50 people. Can you forgive him? How about something nebulous, more nebulous, like British Petroleum when they had the big oil spill down in the Gulf of Mexico and all the damage they did? Can you forgive them? What about child abuse? Can you forgive the abuser, whether it's physical or sexual? How about elder abuse or spousal abuse? What about rape? Can you forgive the rapist? These are all big questions. So I want you for a moment to write down your definition of forgiveness. Take a minute, pause this voiceover, and think about how you view forgiveness. What is forgiveness to you? And then we're going to talk about it. Okay, now that you've written your definition, here's one of the definitions you'll find in a dictionary. To grant pardon or remission for an offense, a debt, to absolve, to give up all claims of account, to grant a pardon, to cease to feel resentment. That's a big one, to cease to feel resentment. You can excuse a fault or an offense. And then, of course, forgiveness is the act of forgiving. So one of the definitions I like comes out of a positive psychology textbook by Snyder and Lopez, and they get it from Thompson, and says forgiveness is a freeing from a negative attachment to the source of the transgression. Okay, we'll go into that a little deeper, but this allows the target of forgiveness to be oneself or another person or a situation that's viewed out of one's control. So I like the fact that you free yourself from a negative attachment to the source, and that can be yourself. You can forgive yourself. We're going to talk about forgiveness of others, but one of the hardest people to forgive is yourself. I like Oprah's concept of forgiveness. She says you have to accept the fact that the past can't change. And then you've got to go on and live your best life, regardless of what anybody has done or said. So if you look at this, we're looking at a complete and unconditional acceptance for the transgressor to be who they am, to follow their own path. By the same token, I have an unconditional acceptance of me, and I too can go my own way. If you look at it this way, then nothing is owed to anyone. They don't owe you, you don't owe them. So the way I put it succinctly is, God bless you, have a happy life, go and have a happy life, and just stay out of my life. So as we move along, let's talk about what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not condoning an action. It doesn't require reconciliation. You do not have to kiss and make up to forgive. It's not about giving in, excusing, or forgetting about something. And it's certainly not a way to feel morally superior. We live in a culture of forgiveness. If you go on Google and type in forgiveness songs, you'll get almost 20 million hits. The media, of course, is obsessed with who's forgiving who or who is not forgiving who. Men apparently need it much more often than women in our society. There's a florist shop, George's Florist, down from the college, which has a sign out says get wife insurance here 24 hours a day. They have a vending machine apparently where you can get roses 24 hours a day for forgiveness. And then of course there's this guy who just keeps insulting people, never apologizes himself, but expects others to apologize if they've slighted him. So he may grant them forgiveness at some point. So why should we forgive? You have to ask yourself, who's going to be more hurt by unforgiveness? And the reality is it's the victim. Okay, the person who has been transgressed against is going to be hurt more by not forgiving than the person who transgressed them. It's like if you get cut off as you're driving into school and you're going to road rage, and you come in and you're complaining to everybody for half a day about how this idiot cut you off, and that idiot drives on to his job, doesn't even know that he did it to you, could care less. So you see how it affects the victim more than the transgressor. There is a psychological aspect to this. It's been studied for decades. Being able to forgive leads to better health, physical and mental health, as to better relationships. Continuing with the psychological aspect, we look at it, forgiveness requires that sense of self. I know you've heard that a little bit in this course. You've got to know who you am, and that sense of self is often damaged due to the problems requiring forgiveness. If one learns to forgive, you can build up the sense of self, build up your self-image, your self-worth, your self-esteem, and you can become stronger. And all of that requires you know who you am. You want to be able to give up the negative emotions that are at the core of forgiveness. So, from a positive psychology standpoint, forgiveness creates positive emotions. That fits in with our broaden and build theory, which we studied earlier. Okay, all of these things. If you're stuck in unforgiveness, then you don't experience as many positive emotions. Now, the religious aspect. Can you go to heaven without forgiveness? Most of the major religions say no. So when you look at the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they all say, as do Hinduism, Buddhism, and so forth, that you must have three things to go to heaven: love, compassion, and forgiveness. So when you get into forgiveness in the religious aspect, you just generally start with original sin, or what Martin Seligman calls the rotten to the core dogma. And I happen to agree with Dr. Seligman on this point. So original sin says we're all born with sin. We come into the world in sin. And Christianity, for one, but the other religions too, always talks about the goodness of God and the badness of people. Okay? Christians want to be forgiven when they die so they can go to heaven. I once had a friend, an associate, who I apparently transgressed against, and she said that she would continue to forgive me every day for the rest of her life. I thought that was a little much, but that's a whole nother story. So how are we forgiven? In religion, there's usually some sort of confession where there's a penance given, something you have to do to make up for it, or atonement. The Jewish religion has Yom Kippur, which is a day of atonement. They have one day a year where they ask forgiveness for all the things they did during the year. In Christianity, it's usually more often. In Catholicism, you can go to confession or the sacrament of penance, daily, weekly, whatever. In society, we forgive people by an apology, and the apology should have both responsibility and accountability. And we'll talk specifically about that in a minute. But let's look at confession. In the Catholic religion, the sacrament of penance talks about we must examine our conscience. Now, this is important for knowing who you am. You've got to be able to look at yourself. But the criteria to be forgiven for Catholics, I grew up Catholic, by the way. We must have sorrow for our sins. We've got to be sorry for what we did. We have to make a firm resolution. We're not going to do it again. We confess our sins to the priest, and then we accept the penance that they give us. And as I said, examining our conscience becomes very important. So how do we examine the conscience? We got to look closely at the nature of what we did. We need to know the difference between rumination and processing. Rumination is going over and over what happened, reliving the event, and feeling the negative emotions. It makes you feel more angry, more resentful, whatever. If you let's say you're in a breakup, a relationship breakup, you keep going over what the person did, and you keep building to where you go from being upset with them to hating them, despising them, and so forth. Now, processing is reviewing what you did or what happened, and with a different attitude. There's a series of stages of change, and until eventually the emotional charge is released. It's not there anymore. You've let go of it, like the picture on this slide with the chain. You break free from that, and that's when you can say that whatever the transgression was has been processed. Okay, so part of it is hitting the replay button, but you don't want to get into the negative emotions of it. You want to review it and observe what happens so you can learn from it and essentially get over it. Hopefully that makes sense to you. It'd be nice if we had a pill, Forgiven All, and just take the pill, but we don't. So there's a whole industry out there to help you with your apologies. Most of the cards involve some kind of cute little animal, and or a cartoon. There's also this concept. People act like children sometimes when I'm sorry, because children have to get forgiven quite a bit as they're growing up and make mistakes. So we get locked into that habit. So, what is a real apology? Real apology has three parts. Say, I'm sorry, it's my fault, and then what can I do to make it right? Most people forget that third part. Okay? Now, languaging. People can deceive with their language, conceal, misdirect, create a verbal equivalent to an optical illusion. And that results in what I call a non-apology apology. There's a couple of books out on that, and then there's a link down at the bottom if you want to explore 6 apologies that are not apologies. But none of those apologies have part 3 in them, and most of them don't even have part 2 in them in a non-apology apology. The most common one that I see is, I'm sorry if I've offended anyone. I'm sorry if what I did offended you. And then what's left unsaid is, it's your fault that it offended you. I'm not sorry for what I did. Does that make sense? So be careful of that. So using the word apology or apologize does not make something an apology. Planning to offer up an apology is not an apology. A real apology as an expression of remorse or regret, a wish that it didn't happen, a wish to make amends, and an acknowledgement that an offense has been committed. Okay, all of those things. So when there's a real apology, there's a transfer of power, a transfer of control from the transgressor to the transgressed. You're giving over to the person that you offended the power. You're taking responsibility for your actions. I did it. It's my fault. And the accountability. That's called fess up and fix it. I show a video of the Blue Angels flight team when they have their debriefing after the flight. They get rid of rank. Nobody is involved with, nobody cares about what rank is. Everybody, if they made a mistake, they own up to it, they fess up, and then they assure their teammates that they're going to fix it. Because if they don't, it could result in a crash. So you have to have responsibility. That's the fess up. Okay, I did it. It's my fault. And then accountability. I'm going to fix it. It's not going to happen again. Okay, now people hate giving up control. I use the example of Lance Armstrong when he finally got put in the position where he had to admit that he had been using performance-enhancing drugs for all those years. He was winning the bike races, and he went on an interview with Oprah Winfrey, and he still kept dancing around. He never said, he said he did it, but he never he never expressed any accountability. It was all, well, everybody else was doing it. I was just better than them, and so forth. An effective and meaningful apology requires sincerity, repair of the hurt, acknowledgement of their feelings, restoration of their dignity, an expression of remorse for hurting them. You need to obviously know what you're apologizing for. You want to try to reestablish trust, and that may take some time. We'll talk about that in the next segment. Have an opportunity to dialogue and hope for a future relationship. Now, that may not necessarily, you may not have to address all of those things, but most of those should be addressed in a real apology. You have to tell people, I know I've hurt you. And if you don't understand it, tell me how I've hurt you. Help me understand the damage I've done. You got to be willing to listen and be willing to repair the damage. I want to show you that you are important to me, that this relationship matters to me, that I care about you. Those of you who are in the addictions and recovery course will recognize the 2 of the 12 steps. 2 of the 12 steps in a 12-step program require that responsibility and accountability to make amends to people that they've transgressed. So this is the end of part one. I hope to see you very shortly in part two.